William Tyndale was a reformer, a Bible translator, and ultimately a martyr. He worked in secret to give England a translation of Scripture in their own language, translated out of the original Greek and Hebrew. In doing so, he had a tremendous impact, not only on the history of the church, but on the history of the English language. Every modern Bible translation relies heavily on Tyndale's work, and there are a number of words and phrases that he came up with that we still use today. Although he was able to smuggle copies of his New Testament into England, many of those copies were confiscated and burned by the Catholic Church. Because of that, and the fact that 500 years have gone by since they were originally published, original copies of Tyndale's work are extremely rare. On this episode of the podcast, I talk with Owen Felix O'Neill, a rare book collector who has a copy of William Tyndale's New Testament from 1534. In fact, he's in the process of producing a facsimile of this rare book so that other people can have access to it as well. Felix and I talk about Tyndale's impact on the church, how he got started with his collection of over 3,000 rare books, and what the process has looked like to reproduce the Tyndale New Testament from 1534. We'll also get to see a couple other interesting items from his collection. You can see the show notes and learn more about this project and about William Tyndale at reasonabletheology.org/Tyndale. Now, due to some technical issues, we had to go to Plan B for recording the video for this episode. Even though the quality's not where we'd normally like it to be, I'm confident that you're going to enjoy this conversation about Tyndale and his New Testament from 1534. Well, Owen Felix O'Neill, thanks so much for joining me. Welcome to the Reasonable Theology Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Clay. I'm delighted.
Delighted to have you on. Now, we're going to have a conversation about William Tyndale and his New Testament translation work. But before we do, could you just share a little bit about how you got into collecting books in the first place?
Everybody should have a hobby. My hobby happened to be books. Many people had alcohol, cigarettes, whatever. Cars, me, it was books. My friends would go to a bar, they wanted to drink. I go to a junk shop, a bookstore, buy a book. Then I learned about different editions. I love books, I love the material. I felt part of history. I love poetry. I used to collect early poetry, which I still have here. Little Shakespeare I collect. Incidentally, I have a first folio of Shakespeare. So I collect a lot of things. And then when I used to go to the auctions as well, particularly rural auctions in England and in Ireland and the continent. And then I see these lovely old books of Bibles and nobody wanted them. And I thought, well, I mean, I'll buy them. But they cost nothing. They were, I could pick them up. They were very cheap. And I'd, of course, bring them home, and much to my family's little headaches, I'd bring a new Bible home and they'd look at it. And, there's a wonderful expression that I use with friends when we talk about what little money I have, I buy books. What's left over, I buy food.
So it's a good philosophy.
Well, yes, and I love books, and it's something that I do, as you can see from my shelves. And I'm proud of what I collected. I've got quite a few thousand books, and I got books in a book format. I go back to the 7th century, is the oldest one that I have. And then, of course, I took earlier on, I said to you that I have some Egyptian material as well. So in the form, while it's in pictures, it's telling a story. And I love the written word in the sense that how it's portrayed in the different versions of Bibles, which brings on to the subject of why I found Tyndale and how I came across Tyndale. People have to remember, and many people are not aware of Mr. William Tyndale. Tyndale, first of all, was a highly educated man. He was a member of 2 universities, Oxford and Cambridge. He was a Catholic priest. And in order to teach at any of the universities at that time, the Catholic Church controlled the universities, you had to be Catholic priest. But Tyndale didn't like what the Catholic Church had done with religion. It didn't like it's the wealth it accumulated against everything else. He didn't like that the Bible was in Latin was fine, but he felt it wasn't accessible. Most priests really didn't understand. They just read automatically Latin. They didn't understand to what it was saying and how it related to someone's life. And this annoyed Tyndale to no end. And so he felt he was more in tune to the scriptures, and people would be more tuned to the scriptures if they stripped it down and spoke in the language which they knew. So, in fact, Tyndale done a number of things besides translating the Bible into English. And his first attempt was 1525. And then he had done this in Germany, in Cologne. He had to escape. So that's called the fragment of St. Matthew. And sadly, all that has disappeared. He had, of course, escape as best he could, and threw the sheets out the window. The back of the printers got into a horse and cart and had gone. Then the second attempt was, of course, the fabulous 1526 New Testament, and that was he started on that. But of course, in England, all the stuff was banned. The Catholic Church had a grip on religion in Europe. Parallel to that, of course, we know that Martin Luther started the Reformation more or less on similar grounds within Germany, and so that kicked it off. But the 1534 William Tyndale, which I've got the original copy here, which you'll be proud to see, which is this book here from my own library, and this is Tyndale's 1534, which was published in Holland at the time.
Wow.
This was his corrections of the 1526 and the 1525. This was the final correction before he was arrested and then burnt at the stake, strangled and burnt at the stake, and died, sadly, a brutal death. But people need to understand something that Tyndale gave the world. Without William Tyndale, there would be no 1611, there'd be no King James Bible. In fact, there'd be no English Bibles, really, to be quite honest with you. There'd be none. It had been later coming. It had been different translations. In addition, Tyndale gave us something people forget. Besides all that, he gave us lyrical English. Without Tyndale's English, let there be light. You know, that type of speaking was lyrical. It was fantastic. You know, there would not have been Shakespeare. There would not have been the great poets of England. He gave them a language. And what few people understand is that the language of the royal court in England was French and not English. And so Tyndale gave a language because he wanted people to communicate and understand the written word and what it was about in something that they could learn. So in a sense, he was a mass educator. He said, I want the ploughboy to understand the scripture and how it was written. You don't need an interceder. What communication you had between you and God and between Jesus, between you, and rightly so. You didn't need a high altar, tons of gold and all this nonsense. He wanted to strip it away. That the simple message of the word, the simple message of Jesus, the simple message of scripture was there for your interpretations. It just needed to be laid out in a language that you understood. Latin was a mysterious language. It was meant to be that, you know what I mean? And nobody really understood it. They went in there and they didn't understand it. And just what's the point of, you might as well be talking Chinese to me. In a sense, it's ludicrous. So I identified immediately with Tyndale the importance of that. But it's the English he gave. Every poet, every playwright, every writer owes what they wrote to Tyndale and the way that he used the language and introduced the language and gave a lyricalness to the language. This is something no one had ever seen. He went far more than what Luther did. Germany already had a language. Luther gave English. The language you speak today, I could argue whether you guys speak English or not. That's between you and I, but that's fine. But you speak good English in that sense. That comes from Tyndale. The King James Bible, which is like the bedrock of biblical translations to many people comes from Tyndale. In fact, it's almost 90% Tyndale in the Old Testament and the New Testament. He never published an Old Testament in his lifetime. He was working on it, but he never finished one.
Mm.
His three great books, he wrote other books, but there's three great books, really, the fragment of St. Matthew, the 26, he's admitted there were many mistakes in it, but he corrected it. He corrected it in the 34, and it's the 34 is the one in which he then, that was his best piece he had done. He put everything in it, his translations from the Greek. He didn't want to translate from the Latin. He wanted to go back to the source material that was available. He wanted to strip it down to what it was. He wanted to give it the language, the majesty it had. And that was something Tyndale, and that was historical.
Yeah.
And it took time, and he lost his life for this. And it was a dangerous book to have. To have the book, even to look at that book at the time, was certain death.
Yeah, I remember hearing an anecdote that there was several adults, men and women, who were killed because they had taught children the Lord's Prayer in English. So can you share a little bit, why was it illegal? For those that might not be as familiar with William Tyndale's story, he wants to bring scripture into the English language from the original languages of Greek and Hebrew, and he's not allowed to. It is illegal for him to do this work. Why was that? Why was it illegal for him to translate scripture?
All the princes, the royalty, everything held their allegiance to really the Pope, really to the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, in fact, it's ironic that the Latin Bible itself is a translation. It's a translation from the Greek. It's ironic. And yet, when Tyndale said, well, let's make it available, let's do this, yeah, that was an enormous upheaval to have done that, because he was going against the might of corruption, the might of a church. Yes, he spoke Latin fluently, but that meant nothing, because there's few people he could correspond in that language to. He couldn't go out to the ploughboy in the field or to a farmer and preach in that language. He knew they'd throw him off, they just laugh at him. He knew that. He wanted to relate to something, to their language, that they'd understand the written word, the simpleness of the simple word, and what the message was of the Lord. Whatever it was, he wanted to simplify, strip away all the rubbish. That's what he wanted. And that was the genius of what he did. But the upheaval in England, Henry VIII at the time was on the throne. There were brutal wars going on. And remember, England had half of France. There was fighting battles nonstop in France. And Henry's mother was French. So Catholic religion was the cornerstone of almost every monarchy, every power base. The Catholic Church was the center of it. So in many respects, Henry was bound to that. He was declared by the Pope defender of the faith. It was the faith of the Catholic Church. It wasn't necessarily something. There was really no religion involved. It was a monstrosity church that was built on corruption and selling off indulgence and all that. It was nothing to do with the simple message. People lost the way because people went in and didn't understand what was going on. Few people could read and write. There was terrible poverty. There was wars going on and all these magnificent churches, but there were few people in them. And anyone went there like, what's going on here? No one understood it. Tyndale got that. And he said, wait a minute. Let's not do this. It was a lonely battle. He fought that lonely battle. He had to leave his country, his native country, and go to Germany to do it, because if he was caught, he had been butchered on the spot. And also he could go to Germany because Lutheranism had taken foot, and the different areas he was in, or run by princes, whatever, were more in sympathetic with Luther. And Calvin, of course, had come up at this stage in Geneva and stuff. So the things had changed. And he was safe there within reason. But the agents of Henry VIII, and particularly of the Catholic Church, was still very powerful. They were desperately searching for him. And they'd have killed him on the spot. He was betrayed by a great friend at the last minute. And then he had 2 miserable years. And he begged for a coat, while he was freezing in this castle. And he was allowed some material to write with. But it was in darkness. His eyesight was fading. He was only 42 when he died. He was a relatively young man, but at that time, that was old age. A few people survived 30 because of different diseases. They died. But look at what he's left. Look at the legacy he left. And as I said, not just the written word he'd given, more attuned to what the scriptures were, to the best of the ability to what was available. It was the language he gave. It was the culture that came afterwards.
Yeah.
He left something to humanity far more than anyone else had done, other than Jesus on the planet when he was in the Middle East. Tyndale's influence was absolutely enormous.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Will be for many, many generations.
Yeah,
But
we
people,
all owe a great debt to Tyndale, and so he
absolutely.
requests permission to do this translation work. He's denied. He sees he can't do it with England. He goes to Germany. He's working on this, and he's running into issues. He's not. It's not all smooth sailing for him,
Oh,
right?
no,
You
no,
mentioned
no,
this
no.
translation that only gets to Matthew.
He had no money. He had to beg. He had to beg for funds from family and friends. He was in exile. Uh, Everything was focused on survival and the print. That's when I used that phrase I said to you earlier on, when I said, what little money I have, I buy books, what's left, I buy food. Tyndale was the same. And that of course, comes from Erasmus of Rotterdam, that famous saying came from. Incidentally, I do have many translations of the Bible. There were thousands of translations of the Bible, by the way, of the Protestant Bible in a sense. There are a few thousand translations of it. Um, each each if you wish, each group has its own interpretation, but they're mostly aligned to what it is. They don't go far off to what the central message, just a different interpretation. Something else Tyndale did, and it really electrified at the time, was to use the word congregation. He was the first to use the word congregation. So the power was invested in the congregation in that sense. And when he was talking to them, it was the congregation. The church would have none of that. That was like, oh my God, I mean, this was like causing for an uprising. It's like saying you and I are communism. It was like, what? It's ludicrous. But you
Yeah.
see, to have used that was fantastic, because he was saying, I can give you this, but here it is for you to read it. You are the congregation. You can talk among yourselves about this. And you
Yeah.
don't need someone to intercede. I can tell you, I can explain it to you. Yes, of course, I'm a teacher. I can do that, is what he was saying. But when the ploughboy went out, he wanted a few minutes to wipe his brow and have a glass of cider or whatever it was he was drinking, and had a sandwich. He could wander into the church that was there. It was stripped down to what it was. He'd go in, have a few minutes. The book was there on the lantern, and he could read something he could relate to and
Yeah.
understood, and went back out and felt renewed. He could go back to his family, and he'd try and buy an edition of this book and sit down and talk to his family about it, because it's language they could all learn and understand, and also something the children could learn. And so,
Yeah.
in a way, it was the first school book in a sense, because nobody had books. It's just something the families were trying to survive. Very few had that. But you can go to this so-called building church, the congregation, and you could share it and have it. That
Yeah.
was genius. That was
Absolutely. And all the while he's in danger. Often he's having to flee from one place to another. He has to be very careful of who he lets into his circle. And yet he's getting the scripture into England. He's smuggling this into England all along the way, isn't he? How is he getting the physical copies of his work back into England when he's abroad?
because he had friends who were willing to take it. They brought it in sacks of flour, and the size was important. That's not a big size. That's about 5 inches by whatever. It's only because the cover is down. It wouldn't have the cover at the time. It'd be just the book itself without the covers. When people got it, they put the covers on. So it was just the printing. And of course, the agents of the king, and particularly of the Catholic Church, were there to burn it, capture it, and burn it. And they did. They had massive bonfires. So few have survived. As
Yeah.
far as I know, I think there's only 4 copies in the world of this. This one is
Wow.
complete. The others are in the Bishop Library are not complete. They got various deteriorations, so they're missing 40 or 50 or 60 pages. This one, beautifully, is complete. And
Wonderful.
and so, historically, in its place in collected Bibles, this would be much better than the 26, because it's his correction.
Right.
It's correction. Now, I fully intend, after 488 years, to publish a new. I feel like I'm following in the steps of Mr. Tyndale himself. Maybe I should change my name and call myself Felix Tyndale. Who knows? Anyway, I done what's called a proof copy, which I binded myself. Now this is a one-up, and I am printing. I have advanced everything. I had to go off to during the summer to Vienna to get a special digital computer, which they have me has there, and I spent a few days in Vienna, and I brought the Tyndale with me on the grape. It never left my side. I even slept with it, shamefully, but that's okay. It was always safe. And in fact, funny enough, a little story. The first trip when to Vienna, that night the hotel was on fire,
Oh
and the
no.
alarms went off. And I came with a friend of mine, and I had to vacate the place. And this is like 1 o'clock, half one in the morning, and it was a miserable weather outside. And the guys were banging at the door, the fire people, to get out. And I said, "Oh, a minute." He said, don't collect anything. I said, "There's something I'm taking with me. Don't what you think." So I, of course,
Yep.
had it in. I took it out with me, semi-naked, take note, and out I went to the hotel. But that was going with me regardless. And then, of course, after 90 minutes, the alarm went out. They checked out. Apparently, the pizza oven went up. I didn't have a pizza. I wouldn't eat that. But anyway, the pizza oven had gone up, and smoke all over the place. So of course we went back in, and then they done the digitization of the Tyndale, as you can see,
Wow.
and and I needed a proof copy, and then I went back the second time because they missed a few pages in the computerization they done, the digitization they done. But they corrected that when I brought the book back and said I had to go through everything, and the pages are not numbered. And I said, "These pages are missing." I said, "What you mean?" And I explained to them. So they said, "Okay," and they did it. And I said, "Finish, we'll sort that out." And they did. I had to go back there. Then I had to edit it, which took me 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks to edit it. Then I decided I would print it. I have it all ready, so now we're talking to the printers. So all the hard work is done. So I decided to get a local printer to print off for me on regular white paper, just to do this, and it's 851 back and forth, so it's 400 and something pages back and forth. And then I had put it all together into this. And then I said, I'll give it a nice binding. So I do my own binding. So this is a 18th century letter that I
Wow.
designed, cleaned up. And the end papers, of course, or these are called end papers, which are also 18th century. And so I put, I'm kind of proud of that. And I put a ribbon in it. Only, no, friend said to me, "You don't forget a ribbon, Felix." And I thought, they're right, because you need a ribbon if you're going to read it, so the ribbon can come in and out, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I think it's such a unique copy, like Mr. Tyndale's book. I'm thinking of. I said to friends, maybe I should auction that off to raise funds for the printing. But we're going to do copies, so please, anybody, I won't be doing this copies like this. This is like a work of love, in a sense. It's unique, and anyway, so there you have it. But I'm proud of it. I cried with joy when I done this, because I know the importance of this, and I felt very tuned to Tyndale. I know that sounds a bit odd and strange, but I really did. I felt he was always in my presence, because I'm doing something after 488 years that no one had ever done, and that was get an original Tyndale, the 34, and reproduce it,
Right.
and that's what I'm going to do. So there'll be a version of this coming out in the next few months, and you know, I'm proud that I've done it. I feel this will be a legacy for me. I got a few notes in history, who knows, and I feel proud that I've done it in the steps of Tyndale. To be honest with you,
Absolutely. Yeah,
so
because there's been people that have put out, obviously a reprint in terms of the words that he did of a Tyndale Bible, but you're actually creating a facsimile of the 1534 Tyndales, so other people can have this treasure on their own library shelf of being able to flip through and read this.
yeah, that's the point. And remember, as I say to lots of people, the King James would not have existed without the translation that Mr. Tyndale had given. It just it wouldn't have been there. I couldn't imagine the world not having a King James. King James is a gorgeous Bible put together by a committee, but really they didn't have to do anything. They took everything that Tyndale did. Tyndale had been dead, of course, a few hundred years by this. We're talking about 1611. And what they did, they took exactly what Tyndale, they'd done some very slight variations very carefully, but that's a fact. It's really parallels, and they updated the language in the sense, the language of the period, and that's all they did. And really, the King James is really in great homage by all the scholars that put it together, because it was a committee put it together. Is great homage to Tyndale himself. And we have that, but that book is a big tome. That's what's called a folio. I don't have one here, but I used to have one, but I don't have it here. But and that's a different size. You're looking at maybe a foot and a half. That one is quite that. And then earlier on, we were saying about Bibles. And my smallest one, of course, is what's called a finger Bible, which again pays homage to Tyndale. It's a small preacher's Bible. Itinerary preacher at the time would go around on his horse in 1700 to different villages, hamlets, or whatever, and then take out the book and all types of words and read scripture, get on his horse after he'd made a few pennies and get on to the next town. That was quite common. But to survive in that size fleet is extraordinary.
Wonderful. And now you mentioned earlier that Tyndale's enemies, basically, they're getting these copies that he's smuggling in and they're burning them. They unwittingly, fund the next edition, which was a great work of Providence. So there's very few of these in existence. How is it that you came to own this complete 1534 Tyndale New Testament?
As a collector, but let me just back up a few minutes here. Remember, at the time in England, it was a death sentence to hold a Tyndale, to be seen with the Tyndale, or to read the Tyndale in Henry VIII's reign. It was a crime, but it was your death, guaranteed. And of course, your family would be destroyed, your house would burn to the ground. So that's the problem it had. And of course, the fanatics of the Catholic Church wanted to round up every single copy that could possibly find. And families were destroyed over this, because there were powerful families that had copies. And in fact, Anne Boleyn's copy, which is the 1526, survived, and she's the one that read it to Henry VIII. And apparently, before Tyndale was put to death, he begged the Lord to open the eyes of the King of England as he was dying. I mean, it's fantastic. He was saying, "Open your eyes and see. Here it is." It was Anne Boleyn that introduced Henry VIII to Tyndale. Wow. And had the influence then on Henry's reawakening. The Reformation started then. But remember that Henry was an absolute ruler, but he wanted to break from the church. But he wanted to break the church for different reasons, which of course can be controversial. The fact that he wanted to marry her, Anne Boleyn, and divorce his Catholic wife, who was very Spanish. That's a whole historical subject we could have another day. But brings me on then to how I came across it. I collect lots of books. I've been collecting 44, 45 years. And I was fortunate enough, I used to travel around England, and I put an advertisement in the Church Times and advertisement in different newspapers. And sadly, few people collect books today. Everyone is busy with iPads, a thing. When I'm in the schools and I'm talking to kids and they take out their iPads and they're not interested in books, I explain to them, do you know the wonderful thing about a book? I said to kids, first of all, is you don't need to switch anything on. You just turn a page. You don't need to plug it in at night to recharge it. It's there. It's on your shelf. You just take it down. You just go to the relevant page you want. You don't have to worry about the internet falling down. It's already here printed for you. So it's there. It's that simple. But book is your culture. When you don't have your books, you lost your culture, and that's the difference. So having the book, whether it's the written word or any other book, is that of poetry, whatever. I love poetry, but I collect. I've got copies of the Constitution here. I've got copies I got American books from first time. I've got signed photographs of presidents going back to whenever. I'm a manic collector. It's my disease, if you wish. It's my drug, if you wish, in the sense books, papers, stamps. That's my world. And I live in the library, by the way, just so you know, as you can see. But I wasn't sure exactly where I got it from, because I was touring around England at the time, and I had different appointments in different areas over in the east of England, over by Cambridge, in around that area and further. And I had boxes. I used to have a station wagon. I'd fill it up with boxes of books I'd buy off different vicars or different people. They tend to be much older than me. I'm in my 70s now, a young 70, I'd like to think. But they were much older. They were in their 90s, and they needed little cash. And of course, when I buy books, I talk to them for a while, and I some things I like, I'd buy, and I bought a whole lot of things. Anyway, this house I came to, the man had died, and the daughter was outside, and all the books were outside. They had to vacate the house, and I think there were 5 or 6 boxes, big boxes, and there must have been quite a few hundred books altogether. And she said, "Look, would you give me a little money for all this?" I said, "What's happened?" She said, "My father died." I said, "Oh, I was here to meet him at 12, but I guess that's not going to happen." She said, "But look, do you want these?" And I said, "Well, yes." I said, "I'll take them." And I said to her, "How much do you want?" She said, "Could you give me this?" And I said, "Okay." I gave her little cash I had. She was pleased, happy. Otherwise, they'd gone into the skip, into bin. And so I put them back in the car, didn't think anything about it, because I went a about 4 or 5 other places. And then I was on the tour for a few weeks. And I go back, and I was living in England at the time, and in Dorset. And I had a wonderful dry garage, and I'd stock all the boxes during the summer and the autumn. And then it's only during the winter I start taking them down and going through them and sorting out, what I wanted, what I didn't want, what I'd move on, because of course I have to make a living, so. And then I saw this originally, and I didn't think, it didn't connect to my brain immediately. It's like, I suppose, winning the lottery, and you think, yeah, okay, I'm not quite sure. Maybe I'll sleep on it. It could be something going on in my head. And I put it aside with a couple of other books that I liked, and I brought it back upstairs to my. I was living in an apartment at the time, and I got up during the night. And I thought, something about that. And then I have a book on Bibles, and I looked at it properly, and then I realized what I had, and then I thought, I didn't know what to do. I had a few cups of coffee. I didn't go back to bed. I thought, that's gorgeous. So, of course, I got my reference books out, and I'd done a bit of research, and I realized I had something relevant. Then I was almost, what am I going to do? Who do I get it from? And I think, well, I don't know. Anyway, that was over
Wow.
27 years ago. So I've kept it on the shelf, but recently, because I'm getting older now, I always wanted to do something with it. I felt it should be republished, and I own the rights to it. I felt it's something that should be done. I know the 26, the British Library owned the 26. That was Anne Boleyn's copy of Tyndale that they published, and that done successfully well. I think they sold over 12 million copies worldwide. But they have the means and the money. I don't. I'm chronically poor. I'm rich in books, but poor in everything else. Look at my poor hair is falling out. But and then, because they'd done so well, and I bought their copy, and I liked what they did, and I thought, no one has ever seen the 34, which is really the corrections of the mistakes in the 25, and it was his final work that Tyndale did in his lifetime. It really was his final work. And I said, I owe something to humanity. I've got this fabulous book, and I'd like to share it. And many people know it. All my friends know I had this. It was always sits. The wonderful thing, my friends, it just casually sits in my library, and it's there. Do you know what I mean? I'm proud that I have it, and maybe for the spirit of God or Tyndale was with me, I was meant to find it. He moves in mysterious ways, type thing. And I don't know, I'm blown away by it. Each time I pick it up, I'm blown away by it. But it's been a labor of love, and more so during the COVID was pretty bad. I was isolated for a couple of years here, and I got a bad dose of it myself, and I was more determined to get this done as a legacy. So I re-looked at it. I started, first of all, I wasn't familiar with a lot of technology. I'm in a different world, and I wanted quickly to learn. And I learned over time, and then I had a very good friend who helped me. But that copy wasn't good enough. And I'll show you that the difference of that book, between that book and there is another book. I don't know where it is now. I had it anyway. It's somewhere. I had it sitting. I think friend moved it. Oh yes, here it is. I done a very rough book first during the lockdown, which was this book here, and it was really a clumsy attempt to get to see how it would look in print. And I'd done this with my iPhone. Now,
Oh, wow.
me and iPhones are not great friends because it's a bit sophisticated for me. Give me a book any day, but hey, listen, I tried my best. Anyway, so I done the version of it to see how it would look, and it's quite good. It's quite good. That was a cruel attempt, and then I realized that the technology was changing and getting better, and now you had this special computer machine in which you could sit a book in like a V shape.
Hmm.
I don't know what the machine is called, and they're very rare. There's one in Trinity College where I lecture, and there's one in Bishop Library is one, and someplace I'm sure there's few in the States, but they're only for their own collection until I found this place in Vienna. And then I went to Vienna, as I said earlier on, then I got it done. And then the difference to the quality, to the image was extraordinary, was absolutely extraordinary. And then I knew if it was going to happen. And then it was then a matter of selecting it. Then I formed a company. I got some friends on board to help out, including an American friend, Martin. And I felt it was important because the market is going to be the United States, of course. And I think that that's important. And it's in homage, in a sense, in many ways. But the struggle was to get it all digitized. Then when you get the plates back, it's not finished yet. You have to then cut it. You have to clean away all the other stuff that the digitization does. And so you have to just leave the page. And then we wanted the edge where you'll see in the book. I wanted to show, and I didn't want to do no interference, but you see the edges at the side. I wanted that, and I think in the white background it works because you can see the image, and that was the difference. And then of course there's wonderful plates. There's the wonderful plates at the end by
Wow.
Adbrick Durer, the German artist who did this from another book, probably connected with Martin Luther. So it was, now it's a label up that's finished, and all I'm waiting for now is a publisher, and my friends put it up on Kickstart, and we have some nice backers, which is I didn't think it would happen, but it's fantastic. It's great, and I feel that once we get the traction, all the hard work is done. The printing is easy because I got it all down to a stick. It's ridiculous. I mean, you ever thought about a stick? A digital memory stick. It's
Right.
all that now. So they just put in the back of the printing, which they did when I got one copy made. I wanted to see it all sat right because I'm the editor. There's not one word touching it. I will not commit a sacrilege of altering it. I wanted exactly what Tyndale intended, warts and all. Now, in the original book, there are some pages are duplicated. That was normal printing at the time of the 16th century. They didn't have computers. Everything would have been done by hand. So some pages in many older books are duplicated. And Tyndale's the same. So all they did is remove the duplicated plates to get a better flow. But there's no pages missing. I have worked against, I know exactly how it all fits in. So it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all the letters, and then renovations and et cetera, et cetera. So it goes all the way down, and it's
Wonderful.
complete. And there's not a page missing. I nearly had a heart attack when I realized there were 2 or 3 plates missing, and I couldn't believe it. I went back to the book and said, "Oh no, they're here in the thing." And I knew then that the digitalization made a mistake. And I called up Vienna and says, "I've got to go back." And I explained to them. They laughed. Come on, Felix, come over as soon as you can. So they were gracious about it. No problem at all. So I brought the book back again. And thank God there wasn't a second fire the second time again, which I had a very good few days in Vienna. So I very much enjoyed it. But I always felt it every step of the way that Tyndale was with me. I always felt almost his hand on my shoulder in a sense. And I feel like there's a journey I have to finish. There's a
Yeah.
journey that must be finished because I'm going to leave something that will sit in people. I'll be long gone, but the legacy will be there. The company will be there. And I think that that's important. And I think historically, it'll find its own path. It's going to happen because I think it's important not just to religious studies, but also to to writing, to writers, to great writers, to poets. That's what I said. It's the whole history of that and what he left. It wasn't just the biblical stuff. As I said, Shakespeare would not have existed, or any of the great poets, Spencer, any of them would never have existed without Tyndale. Ben Jonson would never have done his dictionary without Tyndale. It was Tyndale really gave this English the lyricness and new phrasing of words and how they're used and how it interacts in a sentence. As I said, his most famous one, "Let There Be Light." I mean, there's hundreds of them, but it's just fantastic. And this is what he's genius about.
That's wonderful. And so we have William Tyndale. He's a reformer. He's a translator. Ultimately, he's a martyr after he's betrayed by a friend and
At 42.
strangled and then burned at the stake. And you have this copy. You're now making it available to others, which, as you said, is just a tremendous legacy for people to have access to Tyndale's work. You mentioned the Kickstarter. Where can folks go to learn more about the project and also maybe even get themselves a copy?
Well, yes. Well, the website that I formed with friends is TyndaleBible1534.com. Yeah. Tyndale, Tyndale. And by the way, on this copy of the book, on the first page, Tyndale spells his name Tin, not Tyn. So it's still the same pronunciation. And though you can't see it here, but the name is scribbled at the back of the book Tin rather than Tyn. So Y is, I think, a later usage rather than Tin, but both is correct historically.
Wonderful. Both. We'll be sure to put a link in the show notes for this episode where people can learn more about William Tyndale and his life and his legacy. Also, check out the project where you're making a facsimile of the 1534 William Tyndale New Testament. I want to thank you so much for your time on the podcast, and I greatly appreciate the conversation.
Thank you very much for having me. I feel like it's such the time has flown. For God's sake, we must meet again and talk about other. If you ever want to talk about other English Bibles, in Calvin Bibles, I got the early ones from 1500, so they're all here on my shelf. Anytime you feel you want to talk away, please, I'd be thrilled to do so.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to have you back. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.